Hello, and welcome to Your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Services Rochester Area Podcast. My name is Jan Heineman. Today I'll be reading to you from the Rochester Beacon. Our first story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Leisha Cudahy and is dated August 12th. This is a guest opinion from Miss Cudahy, who is the director of behavioral sleep medicine and an assistant professor of psychiatry and neurology at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Dr. Cudahy writes into the Beacon, "The sleep care many people do not know exists. Most people know what it feels like to have a bad night's sleep. Few know that an entire clinical specialty exists to treat chronic insomnia. Many are also unaware that there are too few specialists nationwide to meet the demand. When poor sleep becomes a chronic problem, many people do not know where to turn. Many patients struggle for months or years before being referred to a behavioral sleep medicine specialist. By then, they may have tried over-the-counter remedies, sleep hygiene tips, prescribed medications, online advice, or changes to their bedtime routine without lasting relief. That matters in Rochester because behavioral sleep medicine is available here, but many patients do not know it exists until they've already spent months or years struggling with sleep. Behavioral sleep medicine is a clinical specialty that uses evidence-based, non-pharmacological approaches to treat insomnia and other sleep disorders. Patients may be referred for chronic insomnia, nightmares, narcolepsy-related concerns, restless leg syndrome, difficulty adjusting to CPAP therapy, or circadian rhythm problems. That's when the body's natural sleep-wake rhythm is out of sync with the demands of daily life. Of those conditions, chronic insomnia is one of the most common reasons for referral to behavioral sleep medicine. For chronic insomnia, the recommended first-line treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. CBTI is much more than sleep hygiene. It is a structured treatment that helps patients address the thoughts, behaviors, and patterns that can keep insomnia going. For many patients, fear of not sleeping becomes part of the problem itself. Sleep has a paradoxical quality. The harder many people try to force themselves to sleep, the more awake and anxious they become. Even patients with medical training are often surprised by what CBTI actually involves. One physician who recently completed treatment told me he had long been familiar with sleep hygiene and CBTI in theory, but only after experiencing the structured therapy did he feel a weight lifted off and gain confidence that he could sleep without relying so heavily on medication. That does not mean insomnia is quote-unquote in your head or simply a matter of attitude. Chronic insomnia is a medical and mental health condition that can affect nearly every aspect of a person's life. It is associated with depression, chronic pain, reduced quality of life, and other health challenges. According to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, approximately 12% of Americans live with chronic insomnia. Effective treatment exists. Access to it is another matter. Nationally, fewer than 300 providers are board certified in behavioral sleep medicine. That number does not capture every clinician who may provide aspects of behavioral sleep care, but board certification signals a specific level of expertise in this field. Behavioral sleep medicine is also interdisciplinary. Psychologists, physicians, nurse practitioners, social workers, physical therapists, and other healthcare professionals can develop expertise in this area. Here in Rochester, the need is visible in the wait for care. Patients seeking behavioral sleep medicine services at the University of Rochester Medicine Comprehensive Sleep Disorders Center may wait months for an appointment. That demand reflects both the prevalence of sleep disorders and the limited number of specialists trained to provide this care. But barriers to access begin even earlier than the wait list. Many people never seek behavioral sleep medicine because they do not know the specialty exists. Instead, they may assume their only options are medication, medical devices, or general sleep advice. Even when patients do find behavioral sleep medicine, they often have misconceptions about what it involves. One of the most common is the belief that behavioral treatment means stopping sleep medication. In reality, behavioral treatment does not necessarily mean stopping medication on day one. Many medications are intended for short-term use, and some patients may eventually reduce or stop them with medical guidance. The goal is not to take tools away from patients. The goal is to give them more effective tools for understanding and improving sleep. As more patients learn about behavioral sleep medicine, ensuring they can access that care becomes equally important. To help meet that need, the UR Medicine Comprehensive Sleep Disorders Center is expanding access to behavioral sleep medicine. Daniel B. Kay, PhD, DBSM, a board-certified clinical sleep psychologist, will join the program this month. His arrival will expand access to evidence-based behavioral treatment for insomnia, as well as other sleep disorders commonly treated within behavioral sleep medicine. Expanding local access is an important step, but it also reflects a broader challenge. One new clinician will not solve a national workforce shortage, but it will improve access for patients in our region who have spent months and sometimes years searching for effective treatment. Meeting the growing need for behavioral sleep medicine will require both expanding clinical services and training the next generation of providers. Sleep is one of the most fundamental human needs, and many sleep disorders, including chronic insomnia, have effective behavioral treatments supported by decades of research. The challenge is ensuring that patients know these treatments exist and that enough trained specialists are available to provide them. You can find out more about the UR Medicine Sleep Center at website urmc.rochester.edu. Search for sleep disorders. You can phone directly to the Sleep Disorders Clinic at 585-341-7575. This guest opinion, letter to the editor to the Rochester Beacon, came from Leisha Cudahy, PhD, DBSM, who's director of behavioral sleep medicine and an assistant professor of psychiatry and neurology at the University of Rochester Medical Center. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Brody Martin and is dated August 14th. New festival to debut on East Avenue. A new festival is coming to the corner of East Avenue and Alexander Street next month in homage to one of Rochester's most historic festival celebrations. Called East Avenue Fest, it will bring music to the East Avenue stage for the first time since the last East End Festival in 2015. Started in 1990, the East End Festival shared roots with the Rochester International Jazz Festival and also hosted music during the summer. The new East Ave Fest is similarly named, though it should not be confused with the church-led East Avenue Music Festival, a classical and hymnal music festival in Rochester that held its second event in June. The new event is organized by FGB Property LLC owners Blake and Max Giannini, who have previously worked on Flower City Thaw and the local Sunday football block party event. It is intended as a party celebrating Rochester's entertainment district. East Avenue will be closed from 4 to 11 p.m. on September 12th to make room for a stage near the East and Alexander intersection. Planned festivities include live music, games, and a giveaway event. There will be some unexpected things, Max Giannini says. We have a few tricks up our sleeve. The festival will partner with local music venues Anthology, the local Sound Collaborative, and Filger's East End to host multiple performances simultaneously. Local talent on the bill includes Dirty Blanket, the Medicinals, the Sky Coasters, and Rissa the Writer. The festival's organizers are also collaborating with local restaurants to provide patrons with a range of food offerings. Participating restaurants include Taco Dero, Lina's on East, Capone's Italian Eatery, and Aubin Cafe. Other restaurants in the area will remain open to offer more dining and socializing options. I think people will walk away very happy they came, Giannini says. Tickets for the festival can be purchased online for $11.65 or for $22.99 the week of the event. And you can purchase those online at theticketing.co. Theticketing.co. Search for East Avenue Fest. And this story from the Rochester Beacon came from writer Brody Martin, who's a Rochester Beacon contributing writer and also a member of the Oasis Project's third internship cohort. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana and is dated August 14th. Clinton delivers commencement speech at Golisano Institute. Former President Bill Clinton was in Rochester Friday to deliver a commencement address at the Golisano Institute for Business and Entrepreneurship. 55 students graduated from the school's 2-year business and entrepreneurship program. In addition, 10 students graduated from the Institute's new 1-year artificial intelligence and business program. In his address, Clinton discussed artificial intelligence, citing The Coming Wave, a book by Mustafa Suleyman, CEO of Microsoft AI. Clinton said that the book said AI is going to happen whether you like it or not. It's going to be good and it's going to be bad. So our job is to minimize the bad and maximize the good. Clinton went on, I happen to think that one of the things that will maximize the good is what you are doing here. Why? Because you're learning to make practical, positive use of a new technology that we still don't fully understand the total reach of. In closing, Clinton advised students to consider how, looking ahead, they can keep the score a theme he touched on throughout the address, drawing on memories of his grandfather. When I'm gone, I want people to ask 3 questions that can be honestly answered yes. Are people better off when you quit than when you started? Do people have a brighter future? And are we coming together instead of being driven apart? If you can answer yes to all those questions, the rest is just background, usually. Before hearing from Clinton, graduates were addressed by the Institute's president, Ian Mortimer, and founder, Tom Golisano, as well as some of their classmates, Gyang Nguyen, Brandon Kasperkowski, and McKinley Eggenhofer. Mortimer said, "Graduates, we will surely miss you. But like parents, we're looking forward to watching you improve the next generation of business leaders, educators, and other individuals. You'll have an impact on throughout your journey. The greatest gift that you can give to Tom and us is to pay it forward." Nguyen, Kasperkowski, and Eggenhofer discussed their experiences at the Institute, while Golisano reminisced about his initial meeting with Clinton, a dinner at the former president's home in Chappaqua, where they discussed the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative. "I'm thoroughly proud to be part of it," Golisano said. "For 8 years, I helped the organization financially. And guess what? It did all that work with no taxpayer money." Golisano also fondly recalled other meetings, noting Clinton's cordial nature and his terms as president. "I didn't vote for him, but I will tell you, if he ran today, I would not just vote for him, but I would help," said Golisano. Also in attendance were Terry Pagula, owner of the Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Sabres, a team he acquired from Golisano, and 2 minority partners, and Tim Shriver, the Special Olympics chairman and last year's commencement speaker. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana, who's a Rochester Beacon contributing writer and a member of the Oasis Project's second internship cohort. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Justin Murphy and is dated August 17th. An activist and educator rooted in Black history. David Anderson, a teacher and activist who used storytelling to build strength and resilience in Rochester's Black community, died August 13th at age 96. He had been ill for some time, according to his son, David Anderson Jr., and died after a short stint in hospice. He was diagnosed with dementia nearly a decade ago and also suffered a stroke earlier this year. His funeral will be held at 10 a.m. Thursday. That will have already been passed by the time you hear this. That would have been Thursday, August 20th. But it was held at the Linehan Chapel on the campus of Nazareth University, where he taught for many years. As a young man, Anderson was an active participant in Rochester's boisterous civil rights movement, helping shape the direction of Action for a Better Community and the Urban League of Rochester. He spent most of his working years in the more prosaic field of community and parent engagement within the Rochester City School District. In the second half of his life, he reached thousands of children and adults through storytelling, impersonating Frederick Douglass and the Black soldiers who fought for the Union in the Civil War. Anderson nearly always wore a pin portraying Sankofa, a symbol from the Akan language of Ghana that means "go back and fetch it." He took it as a nickname and a guiding philosophy to root oneself in history and use it for good in the present. Rochester Mayor Malik Evans said in a statement, "Like the Akan people, Dr. Anderson worked tirelessly to manifest his steadfast belief that the lessons from history, all the lessons, especially those that caused the most discomfort, must be preserved and revealed to serve as a guide to the best possible future." Anderson was born April 28, 1930, in Cincinnati, Ohio, to parents who had moved there from Alabama. He was the only one of its parents' 9 children who survived infancy. His mother and father had little education growing up and were devoted followers of Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement, 2 factors that greatly influenced his own life trajectory. Anderson came to Rochester in 1956 to study at the Rochester Institute of Technology. He earned a degree in photography while also taking part in civil rights activities on and off campus, including organizing a local picket of Woolworth's drugstore to protest its discriminatory hiring practices throughout the country. After graduating, he sought a job at Eastman Kodak, but was told that his photography degree and experience as a photographer in the U.S. Air Force were insufficient qualifications. Instead, he moved to Syracuse, earning a master's degree in education and working for the Syracuse City School District. His doctorate degree in educational administration came from the Union Institute in Cincinnati in 1975. Anderson returned to Rochester in 1965 at the urging of Walter Cooper to take a job at the just-founded Action for a Better Community. In 1967, he switched agencies to become deputy director at the Urban League of Rochester, an agency that at the time was considered by some to be a tool for the city's conservative white leadership to blunt more radical demands from civil rights organization Freedom, Integration, God, Honor, Today, or otherwise known as FIGHT. The question came to a head in 1970 when Anderson and 4 other employees were abruptly fired, laying bare a schism in leadership and setting off a widely publicized controversy that effectively immobilized the agency for several years. The circumstances were murky, including allegations of inefficiency and financial mismanagement. At the same time, it seemed Anderson and his allies had been pushing for a more activist approach than some saw fit. One of the experiences that energized him at the Urban League was the fight against lead poisoning. He organized a squadron of teen volunteers to sample peeling paint in the city's poorer neighborhoods and then present on their findings, namely that up to 8% of inner-city children had significant lead exposure as infants. By chance, a man named Alex Matthews saw their presentation in 1968 and recognized that lead poisoning likely explained the symptoms that his 2-year-old daughter, Wanda, was showing. With the Matthews family as his partners, Anderson campaigned vigorously for legislation to reduce the harm of lead poisoning. In addition to working with the local press, he wrote an article in an academic journal describing the Matthews case in highly personal terms. "This paper is first, last, and only partly about Wanda," he wrote. "Even now, a child, another black child, is being killed." After being fired from the Urban League, Anderson took a job as a director of school parent advisors to the neighborhoods, a federally funded program within the Rochester City School District that was meant to help bridge the school community gap. After the program was eliminated, he moved to the district's Parent and Community Involvement Office, where he remained for more than 20 years. His wife, Ruth Anderson, was also a career educator at the Rochester City School District. The two married the day after Christmas, 1966, and would have celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary this year. In 2023, the district renamed School 16 on Post Avenue for the Andersons. Anderson's father died in 1980. As a form of therapy, he began listening to and then performing versions of African and African American stories. He began to perform in city schools and community events, including Kwanzaa celebrations he helped to organize. When his Rochester City School District position was eliminated in 1992, he transitioned full-time to history and storytelling. That year, he published his first children's book called The Origin of Life on Earth, an African creation myth, and followed it with the book called The Rebellion of Humans. He and his wife co-founded the Black Storytelling League of Rochester in 1994. For the next 3 decades, it brought them and other storytellers into countless classrooms and community spaces across the region. In 2007, he said, "We have stopped telling the stories to our young people. They won't know unless they're told. The more we know about ourselves and the history that's usually sloughed over, the more we can expect from each other." The Andersons also had a company called Aquaba, the Heritage Associates, that led historical tours and used historical reenactors. Anderson often portrayed Black Union soldiers from the Civil War, but many people came to know him best in the role of his hero, Frederick Douglass. David Anderson Jr. says, "The library downstairs is just full of Frederick Douglass books. Everything he saw about Frederick Douglass, he vacuumed it up." In 2017, Anderson was named to the Frederick Douglass Bicentennial Commission. Anderson was passionate about relaying the experiences of enslaved people in the United States. Some of his stories incorporated aspects of his own ancestors, including his grandmother and great-uncle. "I must reach back and try to grasp the elements of my culture, understand and let what I've learned pass through me," he said in 1992. Starting in 2007, Anderson was a visiting scholar at Nazareth, where he often worked with students and faculty members on projects related to what he called Afro-Rochester. He often collaborated with Timothy Neeland, director of the university's Center for Public History, including a comprehensive exhibit on the Underground Railroad. Neeland says, "The stories were always meant to teach and empower so that we don't keep the same system that we were born with in place. He always wanted to make people more powerful." Anderson is survived by his wife, Ruth, 2 sons and a daughter and 1 granddaughter. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from contributing writer Justin Murphy, who is the Research and Communications Coordinator for Our Local History and a former reporter for the Democrat and Chronicle. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana and is dated August 18th. Legislature votes to accept new Operation Stone Garden grant. To boos from a packed gallery, the Monroe County Legislature voted last week to accept Department of Homeland Security funding for the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and other law enforcement agencies in Rochester's suburbs. The funding is part of Operation Stone Garden, a grant program administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, that provides funding to state and local law enforcement agencies to, quote, support joint efforts to secure United States borders. FEMA is an operational component of DHS. Funding from the Operation Stone Garden grant is used to pay for additional personnel, travel and lodging, overtime pay, and general equipment used in operations by grant recipients to improve overall border security. The legislature voted 17-12 to accept the $160,000 grant, with all 11 Republican legislators joined by 6 of the 18 Democratic lawmakers, John Baines, David Long, Howard Mafucci, Lystra Bartholomew McCoy, Michael Udelson, as well as Legislature President Eversha Roman. Leading the Democratic opposition to the grant funding was legislator Rachel Barnhart, an outspoken critic of the Trump administration and its immigration policies, as well as the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. Barnhart said in a statement read during discussion prior to the vote, "It is not worth selling our souls for $160,000, a tiny fraction of the sheriff's budget, for an ATV, a license plate reader, a speed thing, and a lot of overtime." She added, "Our sheriff appeared in a rally back in April protesting the governor's protections for immigrants, and yet there are people here saying they trust him. Why should we trust Sheriff Baxter, who's never even appeared in this chamber to take our questions on this issue?" Earlier this year, Baxter earned the ire of some local progressives for appearing at a New York Sheriff's Association press conference to criticize Governor Kathy Hochul's policies to protect immigrants from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Critics of Baxter, a registered Democrat, described the sheriff as a Democrat in name only, noting that he was a Republican before his unopposed election in 2018. The sheriff's office did not respond to a request for comment on the Stone Garden vote or Barnhart's criticism. In the past, the office has maintained that the grant helps, quote, achieve objectives such as securing our international border from terroristic threats, dangerous weapons and materials, as well as criminal threats and smuggling operations. A spokesperson told The Beacon in March, quote, "The grant agreement specifically states that funding is not to be used for immigration enforcement and in no way requires the sheriff to otherwise participate in any immigration enforcement operations." Though the county has renewed acceptance of the grant for 16 years, this year's vote was the subject of special attention from local activists and organizers against the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. Kevin Stewart, a progressive candidate who ran for city council last year, said in a statement read during public comment on the vote, "The fact that we've been approving this funding for over a decade means nothing except the willingness of this body to be complicit with immigration enforcement in the past. Federal forces are abducting our neighbors, terrorizing our most trusted community centers, and executing people on the street. A vote approving this contract makes us part of this machine when we should be using every tool at our disposal to resist it. Some public commenters argued that accepting the grant funding would obligate the Sheriff's Office to work with Customs and Border Protection on immigration enforcement and or allow recipients to conduct immigration enforcement arrests, a contention that Republican lawmaker Sean McCabe describes as misinformation. McCabe says, local law enforcement still can't interact with ICE by state law. The correlation there totally blows me away. I think we're trying to create something that's not there, and it hasn't been there, and nobody's really working with ICE. Nobody's working with CBP in this area. McCabe adds, the misinformation around Stone Garden by some of my colleagues on the other side is actually horrific. Unlike the city of Rochester, Monroe County does not have a sanctuary policy. However, under the recently passed Local Cops, Local Crimes Act, law enforcement agencies in New York are no longer allowed to participate in DHS's 287G program, through which local law enforcement are delegated authority to conduct immigration enforcement activities. Agencies in the state are also forbidden from arresting individuals on civil ICE warrants, sharing personal information with ICE without a judicial warrant, or questioning individuals solely to determine immigration status. A fact sheet released by the Sheriff's Office last month says, the agreement clearly spells out that local agencies are not empowered to enforce Title VIII immigration law, nor are we granted any additional authorities or powers under that title. This agreement does not grant us federal law enforcement powers and does not require us to inquire about immigration status or notify federal agencies of individuals with whom we've come into contact with. Others have criticized the grant funding for allocating resources to surveillance equipment, such as automatic license plate readers and cameras, as well as Stone Garden's potential impact on the relationship between Monroe County's immigrant community and local law enforcement. In his statement prior to voting against accepting the funding, Democratic lawmaker Marvin Stephenson, a former law enforcement officer, called on the Sheriff's Office to be more transparent about how the Operation Stone Garden's grant funds are going to be used. Stephenson said, this legislature must see measurable outcomes in order to be able to say yes to this particular vote. And I don't think in the last 15 years there's been any data or statistics turned over to the legislative body to show what the operation has done for the last 15 years. The county needs clear and verifiable reporting. In a statement shared on social media, Roman, who voted to approve the grant, said, given the actions of agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, I recognize the very real and understandable concerns surrounding any program associated with this department. That reality is not lost on me. These federal dollars are administered through New York State and have specific requirements governing their use. Operation Stone Garden does not empower our local law enforcement agencies to enforce immigration laws. Claims to the contrary are false and, in my opinion, irresponsible. Roman concluded her statement with a warning to Monroe County's local law enforcement agencies. She said, let me also be clear about accountability. If I become aware that this grant, its resources, or our local law enforcement personnel are being used in violation of state law, I will be the first to contact the New York State Attorney General. That standard of accountability extends beyond Operation Stone Garden. Our departments must be accountable regardless of where their funding comes from. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana, who's a Rochester Beacon contributing writer and a member of the Oasis Project's second internship cohort. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon is another guest opinion, a letter to the editor to the Rochester Beacon. New York's physician shortage is creating a healthcare crisis. This letter to the editor is dated August 19th and comes from Linda L. Clark, MD, who's a physician with over 30 years of practice and board certification in both general preventive medicine and occupational medicine. She maintains academic appointments at the University of Rochester and SUNY Buffalo, and most recently served as CMO and then president and CEO of Anthony L. Jordan Health Corporation. Again, the title of this letter to the editor is New York's Physician Shortage is Creating a Healthcare Crisis. Over my decades of work to make my community a healthier one, I've worn many hats. First and foremost, I'm a doctor who has practiced preventive medicine, helping patients mitigate health risks and manage injuries and illnesses. I've also been an educator, providing a trustworthy scientific voice in our community to help dispel medical misinformation and empower people to take control of their care. I'm an advocate, keeping up with policies that affect patients' access to care and speaking up on their behalf. And I'm a community leader, working to identify and address healthcare disparities for underrepresented groups. Now that I'm retired from practice, I have more time to reflect on the gaps many Rochester families face and how things can change so we can better serve everyone. Unfortunately, comprehensive health care has become a luxury and a privilege when it should be a right and an expectation for all. Amidst a physician shortage, too many patients across New York are struggling to find a doctor. Less than 25% of physicians in the state practice primary care. The most rural counties have 4 primary care doctors for every 10,000 people, less than half the state and national averages. Such shortages worsen troubling disparities in health outcomes for underserved communities. The Finger Lakes region has significant poverty and higher death rates from chronic diseases like cancer than the rest of the state. Black and Hispanic communities in particular have the highest rates of premature death in the region. We can't adequately address the issues in our healthcare system without fixing those inequities. This starts with increasing access to care and community trust. Independent primary care physicians are the backbone of local health care. Being able to develop a relationship with a doctor who knows your medical history, your family, and the unique challenges faced by your community can significantly improve the patient experience and your overall health. However, flawed federal policy is threatening the viability of physician practices. Over the last 2 decades, Medicare reimbursement to physicians has been on a steep decline. Today is 33% lower than in 2001, even after accounting for inflation. Without reimbursement that matches inflation, physicians must make difficult choices to adjust to rising costs. Many can't afford to take any more Medicare patients, and some are compelled to leave independent practice altogether, closing their doors or selling to hospitals. At the same time, community health centers, which are the only option in many underserved and rural areas, are facing unprecedented challenges. And delays in needed funding from Congress only make it harder to plan for their future. When community-based physicians can't afford to keep their lights on, patients lose options. To reverse this trend, Congress should stabilize Medicare patients to help encourage more physicians to establish practices in high-need communities and to expand the services they provide. Finally, beyond congressional action, we must help New Yorkers better understand their health. Without trusted community physicians, people are susceptible to confusion caused by the onslaught of medical misinformation. I'm doing my part to address this through a video series called Truth You Can Trust, Debunking Common Medical Myths in a Digestible Way. I'm doing this with my nursing colleague, Reverend Phyllis Jackson. Healthcare is not simply seeing a physician once a year. To truly increase accessibility and equity in care networks, we need comprehensive change, socially and politically. This is not a mission any of us can do alone. To remedy New York's healthcare accessibility crisis, I ask that lawmakers in Washington do their part as well. Please take steps to stabilize our system, address the physician shortage, and improve health equity. This letter to the editor of the Rochester Beacon came from Linda L. Clark, MD, who's a physician with over 30 years of practice and board certification in both general preventive medicine and occupational medicine. She maintains academic appointments at the University of Rochester and SUNY Buffalo, and most recently served as CMO and then president and CEO of Anthony L. Jordan Health Corporation. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from special correspondent Peter Lovenheim and is dated August 19th. Judith Viorst's wonderful, delightful, excellent, very good day. The National Women's Hall of Fame induction ceremony this year will be held in Rochester for the first time. Among the inductees who will be there is one of my favorite writers and a friend, author, poet, and humorist Judith Viorst. Viorst, who turned 95 this year, says it's an incredible honor to be selected for the Hall of Fame, and she will absolutely come to Rochester this September for the induction ceremony. She says, "The Hall honors women I very much admire, and to find myself among them is breathtaking." Viorst is among 5 contemporary and 6 historic women to be inducted into the Hall of Fame at the George Eastman House on Thursday, September 24th. They will join more than 300 others inducted since 1973 by the Hall of Fame, which is in nearby Seneca Falls. This year's other living honorees include Olympic medalist Jackie Joyner Kersee, former U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, former John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation President Adele Smith Simmons, and gender equality advocate S. Mona Sinha. The event is open to the public. Details and tickets, which go on sale today, that's August 20th, can be found at womenofthehall.org. That's womenofthehall.org for tickets to the ceremony. The author of more than 40 books for adults and children, Viorst's books include the children's classic Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, and the 1986 bestseller Necessary Losses, The Loves, Illusions, Dependencies, and Impossible Expectations That All of Us Have to Give Up in Order to Grow. She's also written books of witty, observant poetry, starting with The Village Square in 1966, and a series of books about aging over the decades, including When Did I Stop Being 20? And Other Injustices, 1987. I'm Too Young to Be 70, 2007. And Unexpectedly 80, 2010. Her most recent book, Making the Best of What's Left When We're Too Old to Get the Chairs Reupholstered, is a collection of essays and poems about the ages between 80 and 100. What Viorst calls the final fifth of life. I spoke recently with Viorst about her writing, the National Women's Hall of Fame, and her upcoming visit to Rochester. A condensed and edited version of our conversation follows, and further editorial comment from your reader, I will condense it further. But first, some background. Born Judith Stahl on February 2nd, 1931, in Newark, New Jersey, she and a younger sister grew up in nearby Maplewood. Her father was an accountant, and her mother a homemaker, an avid reader. By age 7, Viorst recalls, she knew that she wanted to write and began sending poems to magazines. She earned a BA from Rutgers University, where she majored in history. In 1960, at age 29, she married political writer Milton Viorst. They had 3 sons and 7 grandchildren and were married for 62 years. In 2022, her husband died of COVID-19 at age 92. Viorst's early writing career included an award-winning column for Red Book magazine. Beginning in 1968, the column focused on humorous, sharply observed essays on marriage, motherhood, and aging, and ran for nearly 30 years. Her 1972 book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, sold more than 4 million copies, and since has been adapted for the stage. It was the basis for an animated musical shown on HBO and a Disney movie starring Steve Carell and Jennifer Garner. A live music production, for which Viorst wrote the script and lyrics, premiered at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. in 1998. Today, the book's title is often used by the media to portray stumbles by political figures and others, such as this from a July 13th, 2026 Wall Street Journal opinion column called J.D. Vance's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Week. And this April 2026 Sports Illustrated headline about the Philadelphia basketball team, the Sixers had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad night. In her late 40s, Viorst returned to school to study psychology. After 6 years at the Washington Psychoanalytic Institute, she wrote Necessary Losses, her classic work on the lessons of loss and grief. The book remained on the New York Times bestseller list for 2 years. This is Peter Lovenheim writing, I spoke by phone with Viorst on July 3rd. He gives a disclosure. I had the good fortune to meet Judy and Milton Viorst socially in Washington, D.C., and she's been kind enough to write endorsements for 2 of my published books. Just a few exchanges between Peter Lovenheim for the Beacon and Judith Viorst. Peter asked, National Women's Hall of Fame inductees have included Amelia Earhart, Rosa Parks, and Supreme Court Justices O'Connor, Sotomayor, and Ginsburg, to name a few. That's pretty good company to be in, and a long way to have traveled for a 7-year-old girl in New Jersey writing poems. Judith Viorst responds, an unlikely trajectory and an incredible honor. The Beacon asks, any favorites among the 300-plus Hall of Fame inductees? Viorst responds, I got a mailing from the Hall that mentioned Louisa May Alcott. You're talking to a woman who can still recite Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Joe, lying on the rug. That's the first line of Little Women, which I read about 1 million times. She was a heroine to me, having written this book about how you could, if you're a young girl, become a writer. I get a big kick out of it. It's thrilling to be in what I call guilt by association, G-I-L-T, with guilt spelled G-I-L-T. I see that several decades ago, Peter Lovenheim asks, you were inducted into your high school Hall of Fame in Maplewood, New Jersey. Yep, Columbia High School. Now, honestly, which feels better, to be in your high school's Hall of Fame or the National Women's Hall of Fame? Oh, don't make me choose. I want both. You've spoken about an incident when you were 5 or 6 years old and hospitalized with pneumonia. Your family thought you might die, and you said your grandmother even picked out a tombstone for you. I'm wondering if that early experience affected your interest in grief and loss and in writing itself. I think so, in terms of my interest in existence, non-existence, and expressing myself through writing. I mean, I don't quite know what was happening. I couldn't breathe, and I had this thing over me, an oxygen tent, and I wasn't clear on whether they were trying to save me or kill me. Peter Lovenheim asks for the Beacon, you've written humorous volumes of poetry about each decade of the aging process. Can you sum up your thoughts on aging and human mortality? Viorst responds, I think about mortality a lot and have never understood people who don't think about it. For 23 years, I was a volunteer every Monday morning at a hospice in Washington, D.C. In each decade or stage of life, I try to see what I can get rid of, from the previous decades, and what's valuable and helpful in the present one. I look at what it means to be at this stage of life and try to pay attention to the positive stuff. The Beacon asks, you've been quoted as saying that on your tombstone, you don't want any poetry, just the phrase, she was reliable. It's very unglamorous, but I like that about myself. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. If you're meeting me for lunch at noon and I'm not there, I'm probably dead or lying in the gutter, having been hit by a car. I'm reliable. So, Rochester can rely on you coming up here in September to receive the Hall of Fame award? Absolutely. One way or another, I'm getting there. That's from Judith Viorst, who will be inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame on September 24th. And this story from Peter Lovenheim, who's Washington correspondent for the Rochester Beacon. Peter Lovenheim's most recent book is Gift Shop of Gratitude, which was published in 2024. He can be reached at peter.lovenheim@gmail.com. Lovenheim is spelled Lovenheim. peter.lovenheim@gmail.com if you'd like to write to him. And you've been listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. My name is Jan Heineman. Thanks for listening today, and hope you can listen again in the future.